So we're going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about the other functions of the kidney too. Okay, so these are two that we're going to talk about. You absolutely do not have to know what they look like. I just thought it was cool. It was a cool visual for vasopressin, AVP, and aldosterone. So the first one we're going to talk about is ADH. Also, like on the other one, it's also known as vasopressin. This one on the left is ADH, antidiuretic hormone. It just has a bunch of different names. Arginine vasopressin, argipressin, AVP, ADH, vasopressin alone. So it's a hormone that is released by the posterior pituitary in response to an increase in blood osmolarity and a decrease in blood volume. Pretty self-explanatory. When the solute concentration in the blood is too high, there are osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus that fire and stimulate the pituitary to release antidiuretic hormone. So the hypothalamus is the solute control center of the body, and that's pretty much what mediates the release of ADH. So ADH next acts, on the distal nephron, mostly on the collecting duct, like we were talking about a little bit before, to increase its permeability to water. So the collecting duct without the action of ADH is not really permeable to water. So if we don't have any ADH production, water is going to pass through the collecting duct, and it's really not going to be absorbed. It's going to pass on down the ureters, down into the bladder, and it's going to be excreted as urine. So when we add ADH, antidiuretic hormones, it acts on the distal nephron and it inserts these little channels called aquaporins. So aquaporins allow the collecting duct to be permeable to water, and water flows passively out of the collecting duct into the surrounding tissue. So yeah, the cells lining the collecting duct produce tiny channels. So they sort of make it, they have the genes for this channel, and then ADH turns them on. So they start expressing these aquaporins, and the more aquaporins that are expressed, obviously, the more permeable to water the collecting duct becomes. And a fun fact, alcohol inhibits the release of ADH. So how do we experience this? If you drink a lot of alcohol, you may have noticed that you have to pee a lot. And that's because it's inhibiting the release of antidiuretic hormone. So all of this water is just leaving your body. You're not able to absorb it. And that's also why alcohol can cause dehydration. Yep, same with coffee. So aldosterone, while ADH responds to high solute concentration in the blood, aldosterone is secreted usually when blood pressure is detected to be too low. So the way we do that, aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal cortex when blood and osmolarity or blood volume is too low. So the adrenal cortex, let me see if I have a picture of it. If you look right over here at these two kidneys, these two triangles sort of looking organs that are sitting on top, those are the adrenal glands. So adrenal, the word AD means on top. Renal means kidney. So it's literally the kidney, the organ sitting on top of the kidney. And we'll definitely talk about the adrenal gland in the endocrine lecture. But for this lecture, I just want to keep it in terms of what we're doing here, in terms of the kidney. Okay. So like I said, yeah, when blood osmolarity or blood volume is too low, aldosterone can be secreted. It's also a part of the renin-angiotensin system, which we'll talk about in another couple of slides, which is another really pretty high yield thing on the MCAT. The hormone also acts on the distal nephron, just like a lot of the other hormones. But aldosterone, instead of increasing water uptake like antidiuretic hormone does, aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So aldosterone and ADH work together to raise the blood pressure via ion concentration. So it's sort of like a 1-2 punch. Aldosterone is going to increase the solute concentration in the blood. And like we were talking about before, wherever solute concentration increases, water is going to follow. But water can't follow unless it can pass through these barriers. So the aquaporins that are put in by ADH allows water to be reabsorbed back into systemic circulation. So again, just that key concept coming up that wherever the solute goes, the water follows. And both ADH and aldosterone work to increase blood pressure. So you can keep that also as a quick note. So increase in aldosterone, increase in ADH usually signifies an increase in systemic blood pressure. Okay, and we're going to talk really quickly about regulation of pH. It's not super high, but I think it's definitely worth mentioning. So the kidneys are also essential in maintaining blood pH. They're not the primary method for which we do maintain blood pH, but it's definitely essential. So physiological pH is about 7.4. Carbonic anhydrase, you don't have to know too much about the enzyme. You just have to know that it is found in the kidney and it helps convert carbon dioxide into carbonic acid. So it's found specifically in the thin parts of the loop of Henle. Yeah, and it creates carbonic acid. So that carbonic acid quickly breaks down into bicarbonate ions and protons. So the kidney can actually use this breakdown of carbonic acid to pick and choose the pH. So, bicarbonate ions, wherever they are, they're going to increase the pH because they're basic, and protons are acidic. The very definition of an acid is just the proton concentration, how acidic it is. So the kidney can basically pick and choose what it wants to excrete and reabsorb, and it can affect blood pH that way. So it can reabsorb or secrete bicarbonate ions and protons as needed. So if we have, if our pH is dropping pretty dangerously low, 7.1, 7.0, we can excrete protons in urine. If it's 7.1, 7.2, we can excrete protons. That's usually the case. It's usually the case that it's some sort of acidosis and that protons have to be excreted and bicarbonate ions have to be taken up. But if by some chance the body is too alkaline, 7.6, 7.7, then the opposite can also occur. We can keep protons and we can expel bicarbonate ions. But like I said, it is a very long process and it can take days for blood pH to return to normal, even just from a couple of decimal points. Return to the optimal level, just because, you can only excrete protons so fast. But the respiratory adjustments to pH, like hyperventilation, they work very quickly. It takes usually minutes. So hyperventilation, as you know, if you do something like increase your physical activity, it's going to result in excess CO2, excess lactic acid in your blood, and it's going to cause a decrease in blood pH. So the chemoreceptors in your blood actually communicate with your brain and your lungs, and it increases the respiratory rate. You hyperventilate, you get rid of the CO2, and it brings your pH back up to 7.4 relatively quickly when compared to how the kidney does things. So ventilation, respiratory adjustments to pH is the primary way that we balance our pH, but the kidneys are an essential part, so it's definitely worth mentioning and definitely worth knowing.